Greetings, walkers of the abyss, and welcome once again to The Great Abyss. How are you doing, friends? I hope very well, because today I bring you a special video, an analysis I've wanted to do for a long time, and that I'm sure will fascinate you as much as it fascinated me to research and prepare it. Cinema has always tried to capture that indefinable terror that Howard Phillips Lovecraft captured in his tales, that cosmic fear that goes beyond simple monsters or cheap scares. We're talking about entities that defy our understanding, beings whose mere existence questions everything we think we know about reality. And although many films have tried to capture this essence, only a few have truly managed to convey that primordial horror that makes us feel insignificant before the immensity of the cosmos. Today we're going to explore the most powerful Lovecraftian entities that have appeared in films, but I'm not going to limit myself to making a simple list. We're going to analyze their nature, their power, their motivations if they have any, and above all, what level of threat they represent to humanity. Because friends, one thing is a terrifying monster, and quite another is a cosmic force capable of erasing our existence like someone cleaning a chalkboard. Let's begin. We start our journey with a film that many might not immediately consider Lovecraftian, but which is actually full of cosmic horror elements subtly woven into its psychedelic and violent narrative. We're talking about Mandy, Panos Cosmatos' masterpiece starring Nicolas Cage in one of his most memorable performances. In Mandy, we find something interesting, and that is that the Lovecraftian threat is not completely explained, which is actually very faithful to Lovecraft's spirit. The film presents us with the Children of the New Dawn, a cult led by Jeremiah Sand, but what's truly disturbing isn't the cultists themselves, but what they invoke and what creatures they deal with. The Black Skulls, those demonic beings who live in the shadows and seem to exist in a state between life and death, are clearly something more than simple criminals. Their grotesque appearance, their unnatural movements, and especially their completely unknown origin, make them manifestations of something much older and darker. Jeremiah Sand invokes them through an ancestral horn, an object that clearly has power over dimensions or planes we don't understand. What's fascinating about Mandy is how it presents cosmic horror in a more visceral and earthly way. We don't need to see giant tentacles or impossible geometries to feel that there's something deeply wrong with the reality presented on screen. The film is saturated with unnatural colors, deep reds, and absolute blacks that seem to bleed beyond the screen. The LSD that the cultists manufacture from wasps is imbued with something that goes beyond a simple hallucinogenic drug. It's as if they were distilling pure madness from another dimension. The entity or entities behind the cult are never fully shown, which is perfect from a Lovecraftian perspective. We don't need to see the god they worship to feel its presence corrupting everything it touches. The mere existence of the cult, the Black Skulls, and that dimensional drug is enough to understand that there are forces at play that completely escape human comprehension. In terms of power, Mandy's threat is relatively contained. It needs human intermediaries to act and seems limited to specific areas. The cultists can invoke the Black Skulls, but these don't seem to have the ability to act autonomously on a large scale. However, what's terrifying is the implication that this is only the tip of the iceberg, that there's a whole cosmos of horror waiting to be invoked by those crazy or desperate enough to try. What makes Mandy qualify as Lovecraftian isn't so much the power level of its entities, but the way it presents reality as something much more fragile and corrupt than we think. The film's world feels like it's about to tear apart at any moment, revealing something much more horrible underneath. And that feeling that our reality is just a thin curtain over an abyss of madness and chaos is pure Lovecraft. Now we climb a step on our scale of cosmic threats with The Ritual, a 2017 British film that adapts Adam Neville's novel and presents us with one of the most fascinating and visually impressive Lovecraftian creatures in recent cinema. The entity known as Moder is an ancestral being that has inhabited the Nordic forests since time immemorial. The first thing we must understand about Moder is that it's not simply a forest monster. It's literally an ancient god, a Jotun from Norse mythology, specifically one of Loki's bastard children. This is important because it places Moder in a completely different category of creature. It's not a strangely evolved animal or a genetic anomaly. It's a primordial deity with consciousness, intelligence, and above all, with hunger. Motor's physical appearance is absolutely Lovecraftian in its design. It's a creature that defies all biological logic, an impossible amalgamation of different life forms. It has a body vaguely reminiscent of a giant elk or deer, but with completely unnatural proportions. Its limbs are long and twisted, moving in ways no vertebrate should be able to move. But the most disturbing thing is its upper torso, where instead of an animal head, we find something much more unsettling, a structure that seems to have human elements intertwined with bestial anatomy, with humanoid hands emerging from places where they shouldn't be. What makes Motor truly terrifying is its method of feeding and worship. This creature feeds on the worship and terror of its victims. The cultists from the nearby village regularly offer its sacrifices, people who get trapped in the forest and are brought before the creature's presence. But Motor doesn't simply kill. It converts some of its victims into immortal guardians, beings frozen in a state between life and death, preserved in postures of eternal worship within its lair. It's a form of existence that goes beyond physical horror. It's an existential torture that could last centuries or millennia. The film shows us that Motor has capabilities that go beyond the physical. It can influence the dreams and minds of those who enter its territory, creating visions and nightmares that exploit its victims' deepest traumas and guilt. When the protagonists camp in the forest, they all experience terrible dreams related to their worst moments. This isn't coincidence. It's Motor probing their minds, searching for their weaknesses, preparing them to be suitable offerings. What's fascinating from a Lovecraftian perspective is that Motor is a creature with clear limitations. It's tied to its forest, unable to venture beyond certain territorial limits. It needs worshippers to stay strong, depending on human cult for its sustenance. In the mythology the film constructs, Motor was left behind when the other Norse gods abandoned the world or were forgotten. It remained alone, hungry, waiting in the forest for any unfortunate soul to enter its domain. In terms of global threat, Motor doesn't represent an existential danger to humanity. Its power is geographically contained, and its influence limited to those who enter its territory. However, for anyone unfortunate enough to venture into that cursed forest, Motor is a death sentence or something worse. The film brilliantly plays with the Lovecraftian concept that there are forgotten corners of the world where ancient and hungry things still lurk, places where the old rules still apply and where the gods haven't died. They simply wait. We now move to one of Netflix's most popular films in recent years, Bird Box, which presents us with a truly Lovecraftian concept executed in a brilliant and terrifying way. The premise is simple but devastating. There are entities in the world that if you look at them directly, they compel you to immediate suicide in the most violent and creative ways possible. The first thing we must understand about Bird Box's entities is that we never clearly see them, and this is perfect from a Lovecraftian perspective. Lovecraft constantly wrote about things that were so alien to our understanding that seeing them caused instant madness. Bird Box's entities take this concept a step further. They don't just cause madness, they cause an immediate and irresistible suicidal impulse. This speaks to us of beings whose mere visual appearance is so incompatible with the human psyche that our brain literally cannot process it without self-destructing. The film gives us clues about the nature of these creatures through the drawings made by Mallory's sister when she's possessed by the vision of the entities. The drawings show impossible forms, geometries that shouldn't exist in our three-dimensional space, figures that seem to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They're clearly beings that operate under completely different rules than those of our reality. What's fascinating is how different people perceive these entities. For most, seeing them means immediate death. But there's a small percentage of the population, generally people with pre-existing mental conditions, who instead of dying when they see them, become their servants. These individuals see the entities as something beautiful, something divine that must be shared with everyone. They become a kind of involuntary cultists, forcing others to look at the creatures. This adds an additional layer of terror because you don't just have to worry about the entities themselves, but also about other humans who are now instruments of their will. The scale of the apocalypse in Bird Box is truly global. The entities appear simultaneously all over the world without any prior warning. Within days, human civilization collapses completely. There's no army that can fight them, no bunker that can protect you if you accidentally see even a reflection of them. The only defense is literally to cover your eyes and hope they don't force you to open them. What makes these entities so terrifying from a Lovecraftian perspective is their apparent indifference toward us. They don't seem to be actively hunting us or feeding on us. They simply exist, and the mere fact that they exist in our space is lethal to us. It's as if our reality and theirs had accidentally overlapped, and we're simply not equipped to survive in that new hybrid reality. The film also plays with the concept of dangerous information, another very Lovecraftian theme. Knowledge of what these entities look like is in itself lethal. You can't study them. You can't understand them, because the very act of observing them destroys you. This places us in a unique situation where ignorance is literally the only form of survival. In terms of threat to humanity, Bird Box presents us with a scenario of almost total extinction. Unlike other threats on this list that can be fought or avoided, Bird Box's entities have fundamentally changed the rules of human existence. We can no longer trust one of our most important senses. Sight, which has allowed us to survive and thrive for millions of years of evolution, is now our greatest enemy. Humanity can survive in small, isolated communities, always blindfolded, always afraid, but will never be what we were again. It's a form of soft but inevitable extinction. Now we arrive at a true gem of cinematic cosmic horror, a film that was misunderstood at the time, but which over time has revealed itself as one of Master John Carpenter's most profoundly Lovecraftian works. Prince of Darkness from 1987 presents us with a threat that goes beyond simple demons or malevolent entities. It speaks to us of something much older and more terrifying than the very concept of Satan. The premise of Prince of Darkness is fascinating and completely Lovecraftian. In the basement of an abandoned church in Los Angeles sits a glass cylinder containing a swirling green liquid. This liquid, according to ancient texts, isn't Satan as such, but something much older that preceded all human religions. It's the son of something even more terrible, an entity that the ancient text calls the anti-god, a force that exists outside our reality, and that has been patiently waiting for the moment to cross into our universe. What's brilliant about this film is how it mixes scientific concepts with cosmic horror. A group of scientists and students are summoned by a priest to study the cylinder, and what they discover is terrifying. The liquid isn't simply a mystical demonic substance, it's something that operates under physical laws we can barely begin to understand. The scientists detect subatomic transmissions that seem to come from the future, warning messages from a humanity that has already lost against this force. The green liquid itself is a physical manifestation of the anti-god, or more specifically, of its son. It's conscious, intelligent, and malicious in ways that go beyond human comprehension. When someone comes into contact with the liquid, it completely possesses them, converting them into a vessel to cross more of the anti-god into our reality. The possessed become terrifying, with green liquid dripping from their mouths and eyes, moving in mechanical and unnatural ways, completely stripped of their humanity. But the most terrifying thing of all is the ultimate goal. The anti-god doesn't just want to destroy humanity or conquer the planet. It wants to bring its father, the true anti-god, into our dimension. And according to ancient texts and transmissions from the future, if that happens, reality as we know it will cease to exist. It's not just the end of humanity, it's the end of everything. The anti-god isn't a creature or a demon. It's a fundamental force opposed to existence itself, absolute chaos and personified anti-creation. The film brilliantly plays with the concept that all our religions are primitive attempts to understand and catalog cosmic forces that go far beyond our comprehension. Christianity called this force Satan because that was the closest they could understand, but the reality is much more terrifying. This entity existed before humans existed to name it, before the gods we worship existed, even before time as we know it existed. A particularly Lovecraftian element is the use of mirrors in the film. Mirrors act as windows to other dimensions, and as the anti-god's power grows, the possessed begin to gather around mirrors, trying to bring their father through these portals. There's a recurring image in the character's dreams, a dark figure seen through a mirror, slowly approaching. This figure is the father, the anti-god itself, trying to cross over. What makes Prince of Darkness so effective is its sense of inevitability. From the moment the cylinder is opened, it feels like it's already too late. The scientists desperately struggle to understand and contain the threat, but they're trying to use reason and science to combat something that operates under completely different rules. It's like trying to extinguish a fire with more gasoline. In terms of global threat, Prince of Darkness's anti-god potentially represents the complete end of reality. It's not just a powerful entity that could kill all humans. It's a force that could undo existence itself. If the Father crosses over, there will be no more universe as we know it. Fortunately, in the film, it's contained and needs specific rituals and conditions to manifest, but each attempt brings it closer to crossing the threshold. We continue ascending on our scale of cosmic horror with The Void, a 2016 Canadian film that is probably the most direct and pure homage to Lovecraft that modern cinema has produced. This film doesn't mess around with subtleties. It's Lovecraft distilled in its purest and most visceral form, with all the terrifying implications that entails. The Void presents us with a nightmare night in a nearly empty rural hospital where different people converge who will soon discover they're trapped at the epicenter of a ritual of cosmic proportions. Outside the hospital, hooded figures with white robes and black triangles on their hoods surround the building in silence, not moving, simply waiting. Inside, reality begins to crumble in increasingly grotesque and terrifying ways. The central entity of the Void never receives a definitive name in the film, which is perfectly Lovecraftian. It's vaguely referred to as the Void or the Abyss, a dimension or plane of existence that exists beyond our reality. And that is being invoked by Dr. Powell, a surgeon who lost his daughter and who now desperately seeks the power to bring her back, regardless of the cost. What's fascinating about this entity is that it doesn't seem to be malevolent in the traditional sense. It's not actively trying to destroy humanity out of hatred or hunger. It's simply a cosmic force, a place or state of existence where the laws of our reality don't apply. The problem arises when desperate humans like Dr. Powell try to access that power without truly understanding what they're invoking. When the portal to the Void begins to open, we see some of the most genuinely Lovecraftian images in modern cinema. Creatures that defy all biological logic begin to manifest. Beings made of twisted flesh and impossible geometries. They're not evolved creatures, they're aberrations. Life that has formed under completely different rules. There's one creature in particular, a tentacled mass with an almost human face, that is clearly inspired by classic Lovecraftian descriptions. But the most terrifying thing isn't the physical creatures, but what happens to reality itself around the portal. Space distorts, the hospital corridors extend beyond what's physically possible. Rooms lead to places that shouldn't exist. People who die near the portal don't remain dead in a conventional way. Their bodies transform and reconfigure into new and horrible things. It's as if mere contact with the Void corrupts the fundamental laws of physics and biology. The hooded cult surrounding the hospital are servants of the Void, people who have seen beyond the veil of reality, and who now seek to facilitate its expansion. They don't speak, they don't negotiate, they simply execute their function with mechanical and terrifying determination. They carry knives and attack anyone who tries to escape the hospital, ensuring the ritual can be completed. Inside the hospital, Powell has been performing grotesque experiments, trying to revive his daughter using the Void's power. The results are monstrosities, bodies reconstructed in impossible ways that are alive but clearly wish they weren't. Powell himself has been partially transformed, his face and body showing signs that he's no longer completely human. He has sacrificed his humanity in his quest for power over life and death. The film culminates with the protagonist being forced to physically descend into the Void, traveling through a giant triangular portal into a nightmare dimension. What he sees there is indescribable, a massive pyramid of pure darkness suspended in infinite space, surrounded by hooded figures extending to infinity. It's the visual representation of Lovecraftian cosmic horror at its maximum expression. What makes the Void entity so dangerous is its parasitic nature on reality. It doesn't need to actively come to our world. It only needs us to open a door large enough. And once that door opens, it begins to filter its essence into our world, transforming everything it touches. If Dr. Powell's ritual had succeeded, the door would have opened permanently, and eventually our world would have been absorbed and transformed into part of the Void. In terms of threat scale, the Void represents extinction through transformation. It doesn't destroy reality, it replaces it, rewrites it under its own impossible rules. Everything that exists would eventually be converted into something unrecognizable, something that operates under a logic completely alien to everything we know. It's a form of universal death, where technically existence continues, but in a way so fundamentally altered that it would be indistinguishable from total annihilation. Now we enter truly dangerous territory with Event Horizon, a 1997 film that was initially marketed as science fiction horror, but which is actually one of the most brutal and honest representations of Lovecraftian cosmic horror ever put on film. This underrated masterpiece by Paul W.S. Anderson shows us what happens when human arrogance leads us to touch things we should never have touched. The premise is devastatingly simple. In the future, humanity has created a spaceship called Event Horizon, equipped with a revolutionary engine designed to create artificial wormholes, allowing faster-than-light travel. The ship disappeared on its maiden voyage and 7 years later reappears in orbit around Neptune, apparently abandoned. A rescue ship is sent to investigate what happened, and what they discover is a horror that goes beyond any nightmare. What makes Event Horizon so profoundly Lovecraftian is the film's central revelation. The ship's engine didn't take them to another point in the universe. It took them to another dimension entirely, a place that Dr. Weir, the engine's creator, describes simply as a place of pure chaos, a dimension of pure malevolence and eternal torment. It's not hell in the traditional religious sense, it's something worse, a plane of existence where the laws of our reality not only don't apply, but are actively subverted and corrupted. The entity or force that inhabits that dimension isn't shown directly, which is perfect. What we see are its effects, how it has corrupted the Event Horizon ship to its very core. The ship is no longer simply a machine. It has become something alive, something conscious and malevolent. The ship's metals and plastics bleed. Corridors reorganize themselves. Artificial gravity functions in impossible ways. The ship itself has become an extension of that dimension of chaos. The most terrifying thing is the recordings of what happened to the original crew. The first time the engine activated and opened a portal to that dimension, the crew was instantly exposed to something so horrible, so incomprehensible, that they went completely insane in seconds. The recordings show only fragments, but it's enough to see that they tortured each other in the most grotesque and unimaginable ways. They tore out their own eyes to avoid seeing what was on the other side. They mutilated and raped each other in a frenzy of madness, and the worst part is that some of them are still there, preserved in impossible ways, neither alive nor dead, suspended in a state of eternal torment. The Event Horizon ship wants to return to that dimension, and it wants to take the rescue crew with it. It begins to manipulate their minds, showing them visions of their worst guilt and traumas. For Captain Miller, he sees a subordinate he abandoned in a fire. For Dr. Weir, he sees his wife who committed suicide. But these aren't simple hallucinations. They're real manipulations of their perceptions. The ship is literally rewriting reality around them to break them mentally. As the film progresses, Dr. Weir is completely possessed by the entity or force that now inhabits the ship. His eyes turn black like bottomless pits. His body begins to mutate and transform into something that shouldn't be biologically possible. He can survive the vacuum of space. He can move in ways that defy physics, and his mere presence begins to corrupt the reality around him. He's no longer human. He's a vessel for something much darker and older. The scene where Weir shows Captain Miller what he saw on the other side is possibly one of the most Lovecraftian sequences in cinema. He describes a place without time, without death, only eternal suffering, a place where pain never ends and where madness is the only constant. And the worst part is that it's not a place created by some malevolent entity. It simply is. It's a dimension that operates under rules fundamentally opposed to everything we know as life and existence. What makes Event Horizon's threat so terrifying is that it was created completely by accident by humanity. We didn't invoke anything, we didn't perform any dark ritual, we simply tried to travel faster than light and in the process opened a door to something that should never have been opened. And now that door exists. The engine can be activated again. The dimension is out there, waiting for someone to make the same mistake. In terms of global threat, if the Event Horizon engine technology were replicated, each activation would be like opening a wound in reality. Eventually, with enough open portals, that dimension of chaos could begin to permanently filter into our reality. It wouldn't destroy the universe instantly, but would slowly corrupt it, transforming it into an extension of that cosmic hell. It's a threat that starts small, but has the potential to grow to universal proportions. Now we arrive at one of Stephen King's most faithful and terrifying adaptations, Frank Darabont's The Mist. Although King isn't Lovecraft, this particular tale is profoundly Lovecraftian in its concept and execution, presenting us with a dimensional invasion scenario that is both visceral and existentially terrifying. The Mist presents us with a simple but devastating concept. A military experiment called Project Arrowhead has accidentally opened a portal to another dimension, and through that portal has come not a single creature or entity, but an entire ecosystem of extraterrestrial life. The mist covering the town isn't just meteorological fog. It's literally part of that other world filtering into ours, bringing with it the creatures that inhabit it. What's truly Lovecraftian about the mist isn't necessarily the power of individual creatures, although many of them are terrifying, but the implication that we've opened a door to a dimension where life evolved in completely different ways than it did on Earth. The creatures we see aren't demons or monsters in the traditional sense. They're animals from another world following their natural survival, hunting, and reproduction instincts. The problem is that their natural instincts are absolutely lethal to us. We start seeing the smaller creatures, insects the size of dogs with poisonous stingers that attack in swarms. This is already terrifying, but it's only the beginning. Then come the arachnids, giant spiders that weave webs with threads as strong as steel cables, and that lay their eggs inside living hosts, which hatch in grotesque ways. There are pterodactyl-like flying creatures with multiple wings and beaks full of teeth, and all this is just what we might call the minor fauna of that world. The film saves its most devastating revelation for the end, when we briefly see a colossal creature, something so massive it appears to be the size of a multi-story building, with tentacles dragging across the ground and a form we can barely process. This creature, which fans have dubbed the Behemoth, doesn't even seem to notice the existence of humans. It simply walks through the mist, and that indifference is somehow more terrifying than if it were actively hunting us. But the mist isn't just about physical monsters. It also explores humanity's psychological collapse when we face cosmic horror. The group of survivors trapped in the supermarket quickly divides into factions. There's Mrs. Carmody, who sees the mist and creatures as a manifestation of divine judgment and who quickly gathers followers for her apocalyptic cult. Her transformation from a simple religious fanatic to a high priestess demanding human sacrifices happens in a matter of days, showing how truly fragile our civilization is. What makes the mist so effective as Lovecraftian horror is its scale and scope. We don't know how big the portal is, or how far the mist has spread. The radio picks up transmissions from other cities reporting the same mist, the same creatures. It's not an isolated event, it's potentially a global extinction event. And the worst part is that we have no way to fight it. Conventional weapons can kill the smaller creatures, but how do you fight a behemoth? How do you close a dimensional portal when we don't even fully understand how it works? The film ends with one of the most devastating and nihilistic endings in horror cinema. The protagonist, after running out of gas and believing there's no hope, kills his traveling companions, including his own son, to spare them the horror of being devoured by the creatures. Moments later, the military appears with flamethrowers dispersing the mist. He survived, but at a cost that will mentally destroy him for the rest of his life. It's a perfectly Lovecraftian ending, where surviving can be worse than dying. In terms of existential threat, the mist represents a scenario where our world is being actively invaded and terraformed by an alien ecosystem. The creatures aren't here temporarily. They're establishing themselves, reproducing, creating territories. If the portal remains open, eventually these beings could completely displace terrestrial life. It would no longer be our planet, it would be theirs, and not out of malice or a master plan, simply because that's the natural course of evolution, when two incompatible ecosystems collide. Now, we arrive at a fascinating point where we must discuss two films together because they represent the same type of Lovecraftian threat executed in different ways. Annihilation by Alex Garland and Color Out of Space, directed by Richard Stanley, based on Lovecraft's classic tale, present us with entities that don't destroy life. They transform it in ways that turn out to be equally or more terrifying than simple extinction. Starting with Color Out of Space, we have one of the most faithful adaptations of Lovecraft's work ever made. The story is simple in its premise. A meteorite crashes on a rural family's property, and from that meteorite emerges a color, a radiation or energy that is literally outside the human visible spectrum. We can't describe it because our brains aren't equipped to process it. It's a color that doesn't exist in our universe. This color begins to affect everything it touches. Plants start to grow in unnatural ways, fusing with each other, developing structures that shouldn't be biologically possible. Animals also transform. The family's dog fuses with another animal into a grotesque amalgam of flesh and bones that can't die but is clearly suffering. The family itself begins to be affected. Their cells start to reorganize, their minds fragment, and eventually their bodies physically fuse into a monstrosity that was 5 people but is now something completely different. What's terrifying about the color is that it's not malevolent. It's not trying to harm us. It simply exists, and its mere existence in our space is incompatible with our form of life. It's as if it's rewriting the laws of biology locally, experimenting with organic matter in ways that, from its perspective, might be perfectly logical, but from ours are pure nightmare. The film shows this in increasingly grotesque ways, culminating in bodily transformations that rival the best body horror works in cinema. Moving to Annihilation, we encounter the Shimmer, a similar phenomenon but executed with a completely different aesthetic. The Shimmer is an exclusion zone slowly expanding from a lighthouse where something from space crashed. Inside the Shimmer, the laws of biology have been replaced. The phenomenon is refracting not just light, but the DNA itself of all organisms within it. What we see inside the Shimmer is beauty and horror intertwined in impossible ways. There are plants with humanoid forms, flowers shaped like people. Animals have become impossible hybrids. A bear that has absorbed the DNA and vocal cords of a woman it killed, allowing it to replicate her screams of agony. Trees shaped like humans, humans becoming plants. Everything is mixing at the genetic level, creating a new type of life that is part of everything and part of nothing. The Shimmer's ultimate goal isn't to conquer or destroy, it's to transform. It's creating something new, a form of life that transcends traditional categories of plant, animal, human. From a certain perspective, one could argue it's creating something more complex and advanced than what we had before. But from our limited human perspective, it's destroying everything we know and replacing it with something we can't control or understand. Both films share the same existential terror. It's not death that scares us. It's transformation into something that's no longer us. The film Annihilation particularly explores this through its protagonist, who at the end of her journey through the Shimmer returns, but is it really her? Or is it something that has her memories and appearance but is fundamentally something else? The film leaves this question unanswered, and that ambiguity is perfectly Lovecraftian. What makes these entities so dangerous is their inevitably expansive nature. The color in color. Out of space begins to affect increasingly larger areas, sucking all organic life toward it. The Shimmer in Annihilation constantly expands, and nothing the authorities have tried has stopped it. They're not localized phenomena that eventually exhaust themselves. They're active terraforming processes that could eventually cover entire continents or even the complete planet. The key difference between these entities and other threats is that they're not at war with us. We can't negotiate with them because they don't have consciousness in the sense we understand. We can't kill them because they're not alive in the traditional sense. They're fundamental forces of change and transformation that operate under rules completely alien to us. Fighting them is like trying to fight gravity or time. In terms of existential threat, both the color and the Shimmer represent extinction through assimilation. Humanity wouldn't die, but would cease to exist as we are. We would be dismantled at the molecular level and reconstructed into something new. Our DNA would be mixed with everything else until the very category of human ceased to have meaning. It's a form of death that is simultaneously physical, mental, and existential. Now we ascend to one of horror's most recognizable icons, but one that's often not fully understood in its true Lovecraftian nature. Hellraiser and its mythology of the Cenobites presents us with one of the most fascinating and terrifying cosmic entities in cinema, Leviathan, the god of the labyrinth. To understand Hellraiser's true horror, we must go beyond the Cenobites, those iconic creatures with their leather and pins aesthetic. The Cenobites are simply servants, angels of a god much older and more powerful. Leviathan is described as an entity that existed before creation itself, floating in primordial chaos. When organized existence began, Leviathan hated it. It detested order, life, light. For this entity, existence itself is an offense. The labyrinth, the dimension governed by Leviathan, isn't hell in the traditional Christian sense. It's something much more complex and terrifying. It's a dimension where sensations are taken to their absolute extreme, where pleasure and pain are indistinguishable because both have been amplified beyond what the human mind can process. The Cenobites are explorers at the extreme limits of sensation. They've completely transcended human morality in their search for new experiences. What makes Leviathan truly Lovecraftian is its physical manifestation. When it appears in Hellraiser 2, we see it as a rotating black geometric configuration, a kind of dark prism that constantly changes shape. It has no fixed form because our three-dimensional perception cannot fully capture its nature. It's a being that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and what we see is only a shadow projected into our limited space. Leviathan's plan is fascinating and terrifying. It can't destroy existence directly because it's limited by cosmic rules we don't fully understand. So, it has adopted a long-term strategy. It gave humanity technology, knowledge, tools for its own destruction. The lament configuration, the puzzle box that opens portals to the labyrinth, isn't the only one of these tools. Throughout human history, Leviathan has planted seeds of self-destruction, patiently watching as humanity slowly but surely heads toward its own annihilation. The Cenobites act as recruiters and agents of Leviathan. When someone solves the lament configuration, the Cenobites come and offer experiences beyond the limits of human flesh. Some are taken to the labyrinth voluntarily, seduced by promises of unimaginable sensations. Others are taken by force because their pain and suffering feed the dimension itself. It's not entirely clear if Leviathan feeds on these sensations, or if it simply enjoys perverting and corrupting the life it so despises. The most terrifying thing about Hellraiser's mythology is that humans converted into Cenobites are no longer human in any meaningful sense. They've been physically and mentally reconstructed into something completely different. Pinhead, the most iconic Cenobite, was a man named Elliot Spencer, a British captain from World War I. He was transformed into something that feels no empathy or compassion, only a cold curiosity about the limits of sensation and suffering. And the most horrible thing is that at some level, a part of his original humanity is still trapped in there, aware of what he has become, but unable to stop it. The labyrinth itself is a physical manifestation of Leviathan's mind. Its corridors constantly reorganize according to the desires and fears of those trapped within. It's infinite in extension, but claustrophobic in sensation. Time doesn't work the same way there. Minutes can be days, days can be centuries. Those who enter rarely leave, and the few who do are never the same. They've seen and experienced things the human mind isn't equipped to process. Leviathan's strategy is brilliantly patient and malevolent. Each person who solves the lament configuration, each soul dragged to the labyrinth, is a small victory. But more importantly, every time someone experiences the labyrinth's horrors and that story spreads, it propagates fear and morbid fascination. More people seek the box, more people experiment with the limits of sensation, more people lose their humanity in the search for transcendent experiences. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of corruption. In terms of existential threat, Leviathan represents extinction through seduction and corruption. It doesn't need to invade our world with armies or physically transform our planet. Its strategy is much more insidious. By planting the tools of our own destruction and sitting back to observe, eventually humanity will self-destruct. Every technological advance brings us closer to the edge. Every time we push the limits of what's possible without considering whether we should, we play right into its hands. Leviathan can wait. It waited before time existed. It can wait until humanity finally consumes itself in its quest for more, always more. Finally, we arrive at the absolute pinnacle of cinematic cosmic horror, the film that has best captured the essence of Lovecraftian terror in all its incomprehensible glory. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness is, without exaggeration, the most Lovecraftian film ever made, and the entities it presents, the old ones or ancient gods, represent the most absolute and terrifying threat possible. The film's premise is deceptively simple. An insurance investigator is sent to find a horror novelist named Sutter Kane, who has disappeared just before delivering his final manuscript. What he discovers is a nightmare that transcends all comprehension. Kane wasn't writing fiction. He was channeling the reality of the Old Ones, and his books are the mechanism through which these entities are invading our world. The Old Ones in this film aren't simply powerful monsters. They're entities that existed before humanity, before Earth, possibly before the universe itself as we know it. They inhabited our planet for eons before we arrived, and eventually they were sealed or put to sleep through means that are never fully explained. But they never really left. They just waited at the edges of reality, waiting for the right moment to return. What's truly terrifying is the mechanism of their return. Sutter Kane, the author, was an involuntary prophet, or perhaps a vessel deliberately chosen by the Old Ones. Every book he wrote wasn't really fiction. It was a spell disguised as narrative. Each person who read his books was being slowly infected with the Old Ones' reality, their mind being prepared to accept their existence. And the more people who read the books, the more power the Old Ones gain to manifest. The film brilliantly plays with the concept of reality as a narrative construction. What is real? In the world of In the Mouth of Madness, reality is literally what most people believe it is. If enough people believe in something, it becomes real. The Old Ones understood this, and that's why they used fiction as a weapon. Kane's novels were so popular, so widely read, that slowly but inevitably, they were rewriting reality itself. The town of Hobbs End, where Kane supposedly lives, doesn't exist on any map, but the protagonist finds it anyway because millions of readers believe it exists. Once there, he discovers that the rules of reality are fluid. Time doesn't work correctly. The inhabitants are monstrosities barely disguised with human appearances, and the boundary between our world and the Old Ones' world is almost non-existent. The creatures we see in Hobbs End are disturbing in their design. There are children with faces that split, revealing mouths full of teeth, old people whose bodies bend and contort in impossible ways, and in the shadows, massive tentacled forms we can barely process visually. But these aren't the Old Ones themselves. They're their heralds, the first signs of their return. Sutter Kane reveals that he's simply an instrument, that the Old Ones chose him because he was a talented writer who could create stories convincing enough to infect minds en masse. His final novel, In the Mouth of Madness, is the culmination of all his work, the final spell that will complete the Old Ones' return. And the most horrible part is that the protagonist discovers he himself is part of Kane's story, that all his investigation, everything he has experienced, was written and planned by Kane from the beginning. When the book is published, we see the collapse of reality in real time. People who read it begin to transform into monstrosities. Madness spreads like a plague. The laws of physics begin to fail. The Old Ones are crossing over, not through some mystical portal, but simply by being believed strongly enough to manifest. Reality itself is being rewritten, page by page, word by word. The film ends with the protagonist in an asylum, but eventually he's released because it doesn't matter anymore. He goes out into a world that's in its final stages of collapse. He enters a cinema where they're showing a film about his own experiences, suggesting that his entire existence was simply a narrative created by Kane. The final scene shows him laughing hysterically in the theater as he watches his own story unfold on screen, completely broken by the understanding of his own unreality. The Old Ones of In the Mouth of Madness represent the definitive Lovecraftian threat because they attack the very concept of reality. They don't physically destroy the world, they rewrite it. They don't kill us, they convert us into characters in their narrative. The Old Ones' victory isn't just inevitable. It already happened the moment enough people believed in them. There's no way to fight them because the struggle itself was written by them as part of their plan. The most terrifying thing is the implication that nothing we experience was real in the first place. If reality can be so completely rewritten, was there ever a true reality? Or were we always just narrative constructions, characters in a story told by entities that exist at a metatextual level beyond our comprehension? The film doesn't answer these questions, and that ambiguity is perfectly Lovecraftian. In terms of existential threat, In the Mouth of Madness's Old Ones represent the complete annihilation not just of humanity, but of the very concept of reality as we understand it. There will be no after. There will be no survivors telling stories, because all of history, past, present, and future, will be retroactively rewritten as always having been part of the Old Ones' domain. It's a form of extinction that goes beyond physical death. It's the ontological negation that we ever existed as independent beings in the first place. Here we reach the end of our journey through cinema's most powerful Lovecraftian entities, friends, and what a journey it has been. From cults that invoke dark forces to complete dimensions of pure chaos, we've explored the different ways cosmic horror can manifest on screen. What's fascinating about all these films is how each captures a different aspect of Lovecraftian terror. Some focus on the physical and visceral horror of creatures that defy biology. Others explore the psychological collapse that occurs when we face the incomprehensible. And the best ones, like In the Mouth of Madness, manage to capture that essential feeling of cosmic insignificance that defines Lovecraft's work. What do all these entities tell us about ourselves? I think they reflect our deepest fears about our place in the universe. The fear that we're not as important as we like to believe. The fear that there are forces out there, in the vast cosmos, that are so superior to us that our entire existence is irrelevant to them. The fear that reality itself is much more fragile and malleable than we want to admit. What makes cosmic horror so effective is that you can't really beat it. You can't negotiate with forces that operate under completely alien logics. You can't fight entities that exist in dimensions we can't even fully perceive. You can't escape threats that rewrite reality itself. The only hope is ignorance, not knowing these things exist. And even that ignorance only postpones the inevitable. But here's the interesting part, friends. Despite how hopeless cosmic horror is, we keep telling these stories. We keep making these films. We keep exploring these concepts. Why? Maybe because there's something cathartic about facing our greatest fears in fictional form. Maybe because at some deep level, we want to be mentally prepared for the possibility, however remote, that something truly incomprehensible crosses our path. Or perhaps it's simply because these stories are damn fascinating. They push the limits of our imagination. They make us question the nature of reality, consciousness, existence itself. And although the answers they offer are usually terrifying, at least they're answers that make us think. If we can learn anything from all these films, it's that humanity is simultaneously incredibly fragile and surprisingly resilient. We're fragile before cosmic forces that could erase us with a thought, but we're resilient in our capacity to face the incomprehensible and keep going. Even when all is lost, even when reality itself crumbles, there's always someone who keeps fighting, keeps seeking answers, keeps trying to survive. Which of these entities is the most dangerous? Honestly, it depends on your definition of danger. If we're talking about raw power and immediate destructive capacity, probably Bird Box's entities or the Mists. If we're talking about inevitability and impossibility of resistance, definitely In the Mouth of Madness's Old Ones. If we're talking about pure existential horror, Hellraiser's Leviathan or Event Horizon's Dimension. But I think the most important thing isn't to classify them by power, but to understand what each represents. They're all different manifestations of the same fundamental fear, the fear of the unknown, the incomprehensible, the other, with a capital O that exists beyond the limits of our understanding, and that reminds us that the universe is much bigger, much stranger, and much more indifferent to our existence than we'd like to believe. So, friends, here concludes our analysis of cinema's most powerful Lovecraftian entities. I hope you enjoyed this journey as much as I enjoyed preparing it. If you like this video, don't forget to leave me a like, comment. Which of these entities you find most terrifying, and why? Is there any Lovecraftian film you think I should have included? Let me know in the comments. And remember, the next time you look at the night sky and see those infinite stars shining in the darkness, ask yourself, what else might be out there, waiting in the cosmic void? Maybe it's better not to know. This was The Great Abyss, and I'll see you in the next video. Walkers of the Abyss. Until then, sleep well, if you can.